Today we're discussing the book, The Power Paradox. When men hear this title, they might get excited. You might think this book contains grand narratives about political struggles, wars, or political philosophy. Actually, it's not. This is a popular science book about the social psychology of power, discussing situations that everyone encounters in their daily lives. Let's start with an experiment. Social psychologists invited people with different income levels to play a dice game on a computer. Each person rolled the dice 5 times and had to report the sum of their rolls to the researchers. If the sum was higher than 12, they would receive $50. If it was 12 or less, they would get nothing. However, no one would verify whether they were telling the truth. The dice were programmed so that regardless of how they were rolled, the sum of 5 rolls would always be 12. This means that if participants were honest, they wouldn't get the $50. How many people do you think would lie about their score for money? And what's the relationship between their dishonest behavior and income level? If you have $100,000 in your bank account, a $50 reward might not seem tempting. But if you only have $30 in your account, winning $50 would significantly impact your quality of life. Therefore, theoretically, $50 should be more valuable and tempting to poor people. Logically, they should be more likely to lie about getting more than 12 points. However, surprisingly, wealthy participants were more likely to lie to win the $50 reward. Sounds incredible, doesn't it? This experiment is closely related to power. The book, The Power Paradox, explains this phenomenon from a social psychology perspective. The author, Dr. Keltner, is a psychology professor recognized as one of the 50 visionaries changing the world. Nobel Prize winner in economics and best-selling author of Thinking, Fast and Slow, Daniel Kahneman, praised this book as one of the finest scientific works in recent decades, noting how the author's research on power revealed previously unknown patterns in social life. What exactly is the power paradox? Simply put, it examines how a person's mindset changes after acquiring power. They often become increasingly susceptible to power's allure, begin to abuse it, and consequently lose it quickly. The author describes this process: rapid rise, power acquisition, abuse of power, and swift loss of power, as the power paradox. This is quite evident in history, with countless examples of power loss due to abuse, like King Richard III, Louis XVI, or Napoleon Bonaparte. Having power feels like an overdose of dopamine, keeping those in power in an elevated state that can border on mania. Of course, no historical period can be simply summarized as one person's rapid rise to power followed by abuse and eventual loss due to the power paradox. However, Keltner explains power from a psychological, individual perspective, providing psychological insights into power transitions, whether in historical events, politics, or ordinary people's work and life. Some might say power only concerns political figures, but what does it have to do with ordinary people? The book's greatest value lies in the author's discovery that the power paradox applies to everyone's daily life. He explains this phenomenon through psychological theory and teaches us how to counter this paradox. Let's discuss this interesting book from 3 aspects. First, what is power? Second, how does psychology explain the power paradox? Third, how can we maintain power? Let's start with what power is. Speaking of historical theories about power, Machiavelli made the most influential and controversial interpretation. As a Renaissance political thinker, his masterpiece, The Prince, published in 1532, had a profound impact on academic and political circles, particularly in modern military and political thought. Throughout history, no work has been more influential than The Prince. Like today's controversial self-help books, it lifted the veil on rulers' true nature. One of its most frequently quoted maxims states, "A ruler must be both a majestic lion and a cunning fox." According to Machiavelli, power is often equated with brute force and ruthless manipulation. He advised princes that to maintain long-term control, they should present themselves as righteous and dignified in public, while secretly eliminating any threats to their rule by any means necessary. However, author Keltner points out that Machiavelli wrote The Prince during an exceptionally violent era. Murders were far more common than today, rape was often overlooked, and public torture had become a spectacle, sometimes accompanied by singing and poetry. Most abuses of power went unchecked because the majority were illiterate. There was no media to hold rulers accountable, no organized public movements or militia, let alone any concept of individual rights. While The Prince was a product of its time, today's world is vastly different. The book's principles clearly don't apply to our modern era. So how do we define power in contemporary society? If you think power has nothing to do with your daily life, you're mistaken. Kortner argues that power isn't limited to those in positions of authority. Every ordinary person inevitably participates in power dynamics. This might seem revolutionary. Everyone can have power? How? Actually, Kortner's definition of power might differ from your preconceptions. While we typically associate power with status, wealth, and prestige, Kortner defines it as the ability to change others' circumstances and influence surrounding relationships and situations. For instance, when someone has influence within a small group and others listen to their opinions, that's a form of power. You might argue that influence and power are different, but Kortner suggests the gap between them isn't as wide as you might think. There's simply different expressions of power across different eras. In previous societies, social hierarchies were both clear and legitimate, like divine right of kings. Nobles were born noble, distinctly different from commoners. Power could achieve its goals more precisely and efficiently without fear of questioning. Today's society is different, promoting equality and transparency. People won't follow you without charisma or substance. Think about influential or authoritative people around you. They either have professional expertise, unique charisma, high emotional intelligence, social skills, or leadership abilities. Looking back at history's great rulers and leaders, they possessed certain personality traits that we now call influence. Therefore, ancient power and modern influence are interconnected, just expressed differently. While ancient power was violent and coercive, modern power is more subtle, essentially a skill. Now that we've explained the concept of power, it's worth noting that having power isn't always positive. Remember the paradox of power? The author warns us to be wary of this paradox. The consequences can be severe. If things don't go smoothly and the desire for power takes over, you need to be cautious. You might find yourself walking down the path of losing power at dusk. Does the author's perspective hold water? Let's examine how social psychology experiments explain the paradox of power. In a series of social experiments conducted by Keltner, the first tested people's empathy. How was this experiment conducted? One group was asked to recall an experience where they held power, a situation where they had significant influence. Another group recalled an experience where they were influenced by others. Both groups were then shown photographs where only the eyes were visible and had to determine the person's expression. Usually, 70% of people get all answers correct. However, the group that recalled their powerful experience scored significantly lower than average. This shows that merely recalling an experience of having power can weaken one's ability to read others' emotions. Power also diminishes the ability to see things from others' perspectives. Keltner conducted another experiment with the same two groups, asking them to write the letter E on their foreheads so others could read it, meaning they had to write it backward. The results showed that those who recalled being influenced by others could easily write the letter from others' perspective, while those who recalled having power were twice as likely to fail this perspective-taking test. Beyond empathy, what other abilities does power diminish? Moral sense. A series of experiments showed that powerful people are more likely to run red lights, more likely to berate police officers when stopped, and more likely to chew with their mouths open. How do we explain the dice experiment mentioned earlier? Wealthy people were more likely to lie about their dice rolls to win prize money because wealth often correlates with having more power in life. Power weakens our moral compass, making us think that lying for $50 isn't a big deal. Additionally, power makes us more impulsive in eating, intimate relationships, driving, and speaking, without considering how our actions affect others. After conducting numerous experiments, the author concluded that power and positions of authority erode empathy and moral character, making people more selfish and impulsive. Yet these very qualities, empathy and moral character, are essential for wielding power responsibly. The author argues that abuse of power is at the root of many social problems. If we disregard others' feelings, treat people rudely, and frequently belittle others, we've likely fallen victim to the power paradox. As Lord Acton famously said, "Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely." So how can we avoid being defeated by the power paradox? The book offers several solutions. First, let's look at how to acquire power. Keltner points out that using subtle methods to influence others is more effective than forceful approaches. A recent study analyzed 323 resistance movements in East Timor and Soviet states between 1900 and 2000. Some movements employed violent strategies like bombing, assassination, beheading, and civilian torture, while others used nonviolent approaches such as demonstrations, vigils, petitions, and boycotts. The study showed nonviolent movements have a 53% success rate, while violent movements only achieve 26%, more than double the difference. When you think about it, in today's society, people tend to resort to force only when their power is diminished. In the workplace, some people like to use underhanded tactics, but doesn't this actually reveal that their power and influence are less than ordinary people? The same applies to relationships. Those who tend to be controlling towards their partners are often people who lack social influence. As the saying goes, they take out their frustrations on those who love them after facing setbacks elsewhere. Those who boast about such behavior on relationship advice shows are actually the most pathetic. Similarly, in schools, bullies who intimidate others are usually the students with the least status, respect, and influence among their peers. This principle extends to international relations as well. As Sun Tzu famously stated, supreme excellence consists in breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting. The next best is to prevent the enemy's forces from uniting. The next in order is to attack the enemy's army in the field. And the worst policy of all is to besiege walled cities. What a precise and comprehensive statement. So should we still hear people saying things like, those foreigners need to be taught a lesson? In today's society, coercive methods are more likely to result in loss of power rather than gaining it. Therefore, seeking influence through less forceful means is the true manifestation of power today. So how does one acquire such power? Traditional views suggest using any means necessary, including deception and intimidation to defeat opponents and rise to power. However, this approach no longer works in modern daily life. Keltner and his laboratory members have proven through numerous experiments that power isn't seized, but rather granted by others. When we show strong empathy, consideration for others, extroversion, and excellent communication skills, people naturally bestow power upon us. Keltner and his team conducted many natural state experiments in student organizations across American universities. During this period, students lived under similar conditions. Roughly 10 square meter rooms, shared bathrooms, same cafeteria food, minimal class differences in living environment, lifestyle, and housing conditions. Keltner asked each student about the power dynamics among their peers, who had the most and least power, while also conducting Big Five personality tests, the most authoritative psychological model for evaluating personality in social psychology. After periodic reassessments, Keltner discovered that all Big Five traits, extroversion, agreeableness, conscientiousness, emotional stability, and openness, influence students' power, with extroversion having the strongest impact. People who are outgoing, charismatic, responsible, emotionally stable, and open to others' ideas are more likely to take leading positions in interpersonal relationships. More importantly, when someone holds you in high regard, trusts you, and wants to be influenced and led by you, your influence over them becomes particularly strong. This also indicates that you hold more power in that relationship. The same applies to group dynamics, where everything ultimately boils down to one factor: collective interest. If someone's behavior and character benefit the group, others will evaluate them more positively, trust them more, and be more willing to be influenced by them, all of which are essential conditions for gaining power. In other words, if you bring benefits and growth to the group, not only will people think more highly of you and trust you more, but they'll also want you to lead them. This is the abundance of power. However, if someone is selfish, only thinking about their own gain without considering others or the consequences of their actions, they'll quickly become ostracized because people gain nothing and find no joy in associating with them. For example, when choosing a class president, students typically select someone who is upright, kind, and influential, even if they're not the top academic performer, rather than someone who causes trouble, bullies others, or relies on manipulation. Therefore, to gain power, one must learn to consider others' perspectives and think from their point of view. Only then will people choose to follow you and allow you to lead and influence them. However, gaining power isn't enough. Maintaining it is crucial, and this is often the most challenging aspect and the key point in power dynamics. Those in power typically have two paths: the path of power abuse, accompanied by impulsive and unethical behavior, or the path of benevolence, focused on improving collective interests. While we should know which path to choose for long-term power, the challenge lies in how to walk it. The answer, according to Cotter, is to consistently focus on others' needs, consider both your interests and theirs, and practice genuine empathy. Additionally, maintain sincere communication with others. This approach is actually quite evident. It's how you emerged from the group and gained power in the first place. Reflecting on Cotter's earlier points, when we possess strong empathy, consideration for others, extroversion, and strong communication skills, we're more likely to be granted power by others. If you can bring benefits and development to the collective, that's even better. In essence, it comes down to four key elements: understanding, dedication, gratitude, and sincere communication. To maintain power in the long term, one should persist and carefully consider Keltner's points, reflecting on areas that need improvement and those that can be enhanced. However, we must be vigilant about the paradox of power. When we hold power, we tend to become selfish, impulsive, and struggle to control our desires. Our empathy easily erodes, and we become less constrained by moral boundaries. When we possess power, our social relationships and interactions can make us forget how we initially earned that power. We can easily be deceived by the feeling of having power, believing it's our rightful reward for past efforts, and viewing it as the fundamental difference between us and those who failed. These are natural consequences of power. Our original virtues can be worn away by power itself. This is precisely what Keltner warns us about. If we're not aware of power's effects, we'll likely only enjoy it briefly. Power accumulates slowly at first, but once we've tasted its sweetness, it can vanish rapidly. Therefore, when we become powerful, the key isn't maintaining the qualities that got us there. We learn those before gaining power. The crucial part is being vigilant about power's paradox and its negative effects, staying conscious of how it can diminish our empathy and erode our moral compass. This book first explains the paradox of power. When we have it, power's corrosive nature can lead us down a path of rise, control, abuse, and swift fall. Power isn't as distant a concept as we might think. It's present in our daily interactions with others, essentially our ability to influence people. Regarding gaining power, Keltner teaches us that people are more likely to grant us power when we show consideration for others, display extroversion, charisma, and strong communication skills. After acquiring power, we must fight against its paradox, striving to maintain our empathy and moral sense, continuing to focus on others' needs, showing gratitude, and communicating sincerely. By maintaining these qualities, we can naturally hold on to power for longer.